Welcome to the Daily News Currents. Today is Wednesday, October 30th, and for today's headlines we have ballots set on fire in 3 states as Election Day approaches, why you're seeing scary high chocolate prices this Halloween, poop on Pelosi's desk, a neo-Nazi tiki torch, mysterious statues are popping up in D.C., standing tall, why Perfect Strangers keeps coming back. What happened when Chicago's mayor followed a teachers' union playbook? Ballots set on fire in 3 states as Election Day approaches. In the final stretch before Election Day, ballots have been set on fire and damaged in 2 ballot drop boxes and a Postal Service mailbox in 3 states. Federal officials have warned that in recent months, some social media users have encouraged sabotage of ballot drop boxes. Earlier Monday morning in Oregon, Portland police responded to a fire they say was started by an incendiary device inside a ballot drop box. Oregon's Multnomah County Election Division said in a statement that 3 ballots were damaged. Fire suppressant inside the ballot box protected virtually all ballots, the statement read. Hours later, another drop box was set on fire in nearby Vancouver, Washington, where officials say hundreds of ballots were badly damaged when that box's fire suppression system failed to work. Majority of the ballots are completely destroyed, and the remaining ballots are severely damaged and very, very wet. Clark County Auditor Greg Kimsley told NPR. He said his office is increasing the number of drop box retrievals, so ballots don't sit in the boxes as long. At a press conference, Portland police officials said they believe the 2 incidents are connected. It's heartbreaking. It's a direct attack on democracy, said Kimsley, who has held his position for 26 years. Law enforcement, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, is still investigating in both Washington and Oregon, where election officials are asking voters who dropped their ballots off at these drop boxes over the weekend to get in contact so they can be sure to vote. In a statement, Washington Secretary of State Steve Hobbs denounced what he describes as acts of terror and reminded voters that they could check online to see if their ballot had been marked as returned and would be able to print out replacement ballots or cast one in person. U.S. Rep. Marie Glunskamp-Perez, a Democrat who represents Washington's 3rd Congressional District, called for law enforcement officials to guard drop boxes in the district. Glunskamp-Perez faces a highly competitive race, won her 2022 election in less than 3,000 votes. Her opponent, Republican Joe Kent, called the fire a cowardly act of domestic terrorism. Last week in Arizona, 35-year-old Dieter Koloff-Korn told Phoenix police that he had set fire to USPS mailbox on October 24th. Koloff-Korn stated that he committed the arson because he wanted to be arrested and that his actions were not politically motivated and not related to anything involving the upcoming election, the Phoenix Police Department said in a statement. Oregon and Washington vote exclusively by mail and drop box, while in Arizona, almost all voters cast ballots early that are returned the same way. Ballot drop boxes have been a subject of conspiracist narratives and false claims about their security since the 2020 election, according to Max Reed, a senior research manager for elections at a nonprofit institute for strategic dialogue, which studies extremism and disinformation. There's a lot of misconceptions and, frankly, just lies about what security measures are in place, not only in the ballot drop boxes, but on the whole system of election, vote tabulation, and certification, said Reed. Small-scale incidents, like these arsons, can be used to support and bolster those claims going forward. In September, the Department of Homeland Security said in an intelligence brief obtained through public records request by the nonprofit government transparency group Property of the People that ballot drop boxes are seen as soft targets based on online discussions on forums frequented by domestic violent extremists and other threat actors with election-related grievances. The department wrote that similar online discussions occurred in previous election cycles as well. In 2020, about 100 ballots were damaged when a ballot drop box was set on fire in Los Angeles. The same month in Boston, dozens of ballots were damaged when a man officials said appeared emotionally disturbed set a drop box on fire near a public library. Reed says it's important to remember the drop boxes are often under video surveillance and in many places feature fire suppressants. These drop boxes have been thought through and have these measures in place, and people should not allow these isolated incidents to undermine their trust in these voting methods, which are generally extremely secure, said Reed. In total, hundreds of ballots were affected in 3 incidents, primarily in Washington. Across Washington, Oregon, and Arizona, nearly 3 million votes have been cast, as the data reported Monday afternoon by the University of Florida's election lab. Why you're seeing scary high chocolate candy prices this Halloween. As cocoa prices continue to spike, shoppers see a jump scare prices for chocolate candy at the grocery store this Halloween season. A streak of poor crop seasons have reduced the supply of a key ingredient in chocolate bars, driving up the price for chocolate and confectionery manufacturing from cocoa by 45% from January through September, according to the Producer Price Index. Chocolate manufacturers passed off the high cost to consumers, scaring shoppers off Kit Kats and M&Ms. In the past year, dollar sales for chocolate candies rose 1.5%, driven by inflation and rising shelf prices, according to the report this month from the National Confectioners Association. But faced with costly chocolate, people are cutting back on M&Ms and Hershey bars. The number of chocolate candy units sold over the same period dropped almost 5%. Why the high chocolate prices? The cost of cocoa hit a 47-year record high in February, but has been increasing for more than a year. The high cocoa prices stem from the volatile weather conditions in the world's top cocoa producing regions, particularly the Ivory Coast and Ghana. A heavy rain season caused disease to hit last year's crops in West Africa. Warm, dry temperatures and El Niño winds damaged this year's harvest. According to a recent report from the Wells Fargo Agri-Food Institute, next year will mark the 3rd consecutive year with failed cocoa harvests. As a potential future-proofing measure, farmers have increased cocoa tree plantings in the African region and South American countries, where orchards have been more productive. However, cocoa trees take at least a few years to produce. Chocolate makers expand their palettes. Chocolate manufacturers will likely feel the pain for some time, which means chocolate candy prices will also stay high for a while. As we extend into Christmas, it's looking pretty rough for chocolate manufacturers when it comes to these cocoa prices, said Billy Roberts, a senior economist for food and beverage at the Co-Bank's Knowledge Exchange Research Division. Barring a dramatic turnaround in the chocolate market, he said it's tough to see things turning around in time for Valentine's Day. Dan Sadler, principal of Client Insights in Circana, told Reuters that consumers are cutting back when faced with costly chocolate. Chocolate candy, there's just not as many items per retailer on shelf, he said. We're seeing double-digit increases in non-chocolate items. After months of disappointing chocolate sales, chocolate candy manufacturers have begun diversifying their offerings, expanding the selection of sweeter, gummy, and sour treats. Pennsylvania-based company Hershey, for example, recently introduced Jolly Rancher Ropes and Shakalicious gummies, inspired by the retired basketball star, with plans to roll out more non-chocolate sweets in the coming months. Poop on Pelosi's desk, a neo-Nazi tiki torch. Mysterious statues are popping up in D.C. It started with the poop desk. An unusual bronze sculpture appeared at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. last week, a replica of former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's desk, toppled with her nameplate, a landline phone, post-it notes, file folders, and a perfectly swirled pile of feces, a la poop emoji. This memorial honors the brave men and women who broke into the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021 to loot, urinate, and defecate throughout those hallowed halls in order to overturn an election, reads the plaque on the pedestal below. The National Park Service granted a permit to a group called Civic Crafted LLC to display the statue until Wednesday evening. NPR has reached out to the woman named in the permit. According to the permit shared with NPR, the statue is called the Resolute Desk and is meant to represent the heart of democracy. Here, the power of the people finds its expression through the diligent efforts of those who serve the public good, it says. When rioters broke in to destroy those ideals, the desk stands firm. So too must the principles of equality, justice, and freedom that it represents. The installation stands in direct view of the building that supporters of former President Donald Trump stormed on January 6th, threatening the peaceful transition of power and forcing a panicked evacuation of the nation's leaders. 4 people died at the Capitol that day. A Capitol police officer who had fought back the rioters died the following day, and several other officers who had been on duty died by suicide in the ensuing months. The riot caused some $1.5 million in damage to the building, and members of Congress have said that some of the participants urinated and defecated inside. One of them appeared to have been Francis Connor, a Brooklyn resident who was among the more than 1,500 people charged so far in connection with January 6. "I was in the Capitol, and I pooped in Pelosi's desk," Connor messaged a group chat in the days after the insurrection, according to court filings. "Come lock me up. There's nothing to live for if Trump isn't in office." He was sentenced in September 2022 in 12 months in prison. Another rioter, an Arkansas man who was photographed propping his feet on a desk in Pelosi's office, was sentenced in 2023 to more than 4 years. Trump was indicted by a federal grand jury in 2023 for his efforts to overturn the 2020 election, and investigations by Special Counsel Jack Smith and the House January 6 committee has concluded that his actions and rhetoric are to blame for the Capitol riot. But Trump has downplayed the violent assault and his role in it. During his time on the campaign trail, even calling January 6 a day of love at Univision Town Hall earlier this month. He had repeatedly spoke kindly of the rioters and said he would pardon them if re-elected. President Trump celebrates these heroes of January 6 as unbelievable patriots and warriors, the Poop statue plaque adds. The monument stands as a testament for their daring sacrifice and lasting legacy. Mike Litterist, the chief of communications for National Mall and Memorial Parks, told NPR via email that permits are required for organized activities in areas administered by the National Park Service to protect park resources and public safety. The National Park Service does not consider the content of the message to be presented, he added. The statue drew mixed reactions and much photographing from passerbyers. Jeff Perels Johnson, who biked to D.C. from Alexandria, Virginia, to check out the statue, told NPR that he thinks it's a great juxtaposition to what Trump thinks this was, and just flat out funny. Christian Hardick, a trained artist and former D.C. resident who lives just blocks from the Capitol on January 6, agrees. "I think I would interpret the message as being pretty fictitious, and clearly the visual that they have with this piece of art is showcasing that," Hardick added. The sculpture appears to have ruffles at least some feathers. Last weekend, just days after its arrival, people noticed Pelosi's nameplate and some letters on the plaque had been suddenly gone missing. Then on Monday, another statue appeared. A tiki torch statue rises near the White House. The new statue, which the permit shows was granted to the same group behind the desk, made its debut this week in Freedom Plaza, an area along Pennsylvania Avenue just blocks from the White House. The bronze-colored statue depicts a fist clutching a tiki torch, an object that took an additional symbolism after white nationalists carried them as they marched through Charlottesville, Virginia, at the Unite the Right rally in August 2017. The plaque on the 97-inch tall sculpture titled "The Donald J. Trump Enduring Flame" makes reference to that very event. This moment pays tribute to President Donald Trump and the very fine people he boldly stood to defend when they marched in Charlottesville, Virginia, it reads. White supremacists marched through the University of Virginia's campus at night, chanting, "Jews will not replace us." The following day, they rallied downtown around a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee, which the city had voted to remove. Clashes between the marchers and counter-protesters quickly turned violent, prompting the governor to eventually declare a state of emergency. One demonstrator ran his car into the crowd, injuring dozens of people and killing 32-year-old Heather Heyer. 2 state police officers who had been monitoring the scene died in a helicopter crash. Trump had defended and downplayed the actions of the white supremacists who marched that day, saying in the immediate aftermath that they were very fine people on both sides. President Biden repeatedly said on the 2020 campaign trail that it was a moment that had pushed him to return to politics. Like the poop statue, the tiki torch refers to Trump's role in the episode of recent history that many consider shameful and that Democrats have tried to use against him as he runs for a re-election. While many have called them white supremacists and neo-Nazis, President Trump's voice rang out above the rest to remind all that they were treated absolutely unfairly. This monument stands as an everlasting reminder of that bold proclamation. Everlasting may be a stretch. The permit that the Park Service granted to Civic Crafted LLC only allows the tiki torch to remain in place until Thursday, just days before the election. Standing Tall. Why Perfect Strangers keeps coming back. From The Leftovers to Only Murderers in the Building, Perfect Strangers, the wacky 1980s sitcom with a bombastic theme song, is enjoying a strange afterlife. In the latest season of Only Murders in the Building, the show trio of amateur detectives are investigating yet another murder and discover a theme and a song from an unlikely source, another TV show. The show is Perfect Strangers, the wacky 1980s sitcom that paired two cousins who, like the stars in Only Murders in the Building, and its new cast of characters this season, couldn't have been more different. The uplifting, bombastic Perfect Strangers theme song appears in the Only Murders fourth season, which concludes Tuesday. We needed something that landed as a clue, something that opened up something curious for our trio to discover, something that kept hitting over and over again, John Hoffman, the Only Murderers showrunner, said. And so, the Perfect Strangers theme song appears as a call sign over the ham radios of Misfit residents introduced in the season of Only Murderers and referred to as the Westies. Those are the tenants who live in the West Tower of Acronia, across from where Mabel Mora, Oliver Putman, and Charles Hayden Savage live, and where much of the investigation focuses. In one scene, an apartment in the West Tower of Acronia, the New York City residential building at the center of the show, Mabel softly begins singing. No matter what the odds are this time, nothing's going to stand in the way, she chimes. Oliver mumbles along. The flame in my heart, long lost friend, gives every dark street a light at the end. Standing tall, they belt out together. What is that bizarrely catchy song? Oliver asks. You don't know the theme to Perfect Strangers? Mabel responds, after explaining she heard it earlier on the ham radio in a neighbor's apartment. The Perfect Strangers theme song, Nothing's Gonna Stop Me Now, by Jesse Frederick and Benny Salovey, may best typify the sitcom's earworms of the 1980s. Full of bravado and optimism, the song is on full display when Oliver and Zach Galifianakis, who plays himself as the actor cast to play Oliver in the Hollywood movie being made about the podcast in Season 4, perform a dance montage. Perfect Strangers told the story of Larry Appleton, who moves to Chicago only to have his long-lost cousin, Bulky Bader-McComas, arrive from MyPost and become his roommate. The show ran for 8 seasons on ABC from 1986 to 1993, eventually landing a spot in the original TGIF lineup. Decades later, Perfect Strangers have now landed a guest role in a popular TV series in the second time in recent years. Musically, the Perfect Strangers song was catchy enough to keep people hooked, Hoffman said. Thematically, it underpinned the series and the season. Together with the card game and the ham radios, the Perfect Strangers song told the story of what united the Westies as a family, inspired in many ways by the show. Our show itself is built on something that could be described as perfect strangers when you look at the central trio, Hoffman said, referring to its unlikely camaraderie along Mabel, who around 30, and Oliver and Charles, both 70-something. Perfect Strangers was also a storyline on The Leftovers, the HBO show, about the inexplicable disappearance of 2% of the world's population in what was known as the Departure. The Leftovers writers were imagining which celebrities would have disappeared in the rapture when Jackie Hoyt, a writer-producer, asked, "Did you know the entire cast of Perfect Strangers disappeared?" recalled Damien Lindelof, a co-creator and showrunner. That's how all the Perfect Stranger stars departed, except for Lynn Baker, who faked his own disappearance and hid in Mexico. Lynn Baker, playing himself, has a pivotal role in the season, appearing in the episode Don't Be Ridiculous, a reference to Balky's catchphrase, which also used the Perfect Strangers theme song for its opening credits. Though the inclusion of Perfect Strangers began as a running gag, the classic show was a perfect fit. There are few sitcoms that check the absurdity box Perfect Strangers does, and its aggressively confident theme song represents the kind of musical invitation from a largely bygone era, Lindelof says. Plus, people loved it. It became a lightning rod for all these Perfect Stranger fans to reach out and say, "I love that show too, and I feel seen," Lindelof said. That was when I was like, we have to go further. Perfect Strangers represents a time that no longer exists in television culture, Jennifer Armstrong, a pop culture historian, said. What I love about the show is just that this is like a moment in TV history that's totally different from now, she said. Unlike the water cooler genre that emerged in the 1990s and the binge-watching culture ushered in by streaming services, Perfect Strangers represent an era when families sat around the television watching silly shows and laughing together. If you had ChatGPT write an 80s sitcom, it'd probably come out like this, Armstrong said of Perfect Strangers. The same is true of the theme song. What happened when Chicago's mayor followed a teachers' union playbook? In Chicago, the mayor and the teachers' union are tightly connected. The relationship has ushered in generous spending and led to political turmoil. For years, Chicago was ground zero for the Democratic Party's big transition on education. With the support of longtime resident Barack Obama, who was in the White House, and his close ally Rahm Emanuel, then in the mayor's office, the city turned away from policies favored by teachers' unions and towards policies meant to provide families with choices and accountability, like charter schools and school grading systems based on student test scores. That was then. Now Chicago is in the midst of a radically different experiment. What would happen if one of the nation's feistiest teachers' unions was able to elevate the mayor of its choice, who then embraced the union's agenda almost unequivocally? On one hand, results have been good. The district's 300,000 students have demonstrated unusually strong recovery from pandemic-era learning loss in readings, and more students than ever are enrolling in college-level courses. On the other hand, there has been financial and political turmoil. The school district used federal COVID-19 relief money to hire thousands of teachers, instructional coaches, counselors, nurses, and social workers, even as student enrollment shrunk. That money is now running out, and the system is hundreds of millions of dollars in the red. Mayor Brandon Johnson, a former social studies teacher and teachers union organizer, has been trying to oust the school's chief executive, Pedro Martinez, who resisted the mayor's proposal for the district to take a high-interest loan to help cover the gap. Amid this dispute, the entire school board resigned en masse this month and was replaced by a new group of mayoral appointees. The dynamic could shift again in the coming weeks. On Election Day, voters will have their first chance in decades to elect 10 school board members after the Chicago Teachers Union lobbied for years to end mayoral control of the school system and bring the elections back. Chicago Teachers Union has really become the political machine in Chicago, said Paul Vallis, a former school superintendent in the city and longtime critic of the union. He ran against Mr. Johnson for mayor last year and lost. The mayor critics say he should be willing to say no to the union, to close under-enrolled schools, reduce the size of staff, and refuse the union demand of a 9% raise. But Mr. Johnson says he has little reason to say no, because he believes the agenda he and the union share is the right one. He argued that children in Chicago's low-income neighborhoods have never had equal access to school libraries or robust programs in the arts, languages, athletics, advanced academics, or quality career training. Adversarial relationships between past mayorals and teachers' union officials led to poor outcomes for Black and Hispanic students, he said, and the loss of Black teaching jobs. What are we going to lean into and say yes to, Mr. Johnson asked in an interview. I was elected to invest in people. Guess what I'm doing? I'm investing in people. As a former educator with a strongly pro-union approach to education policy, Mr. Johnson is part of the rising group of Democrats that includes the party's vice president candidate, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. Their prominence has been all the more notable because the union's support for lengthy pandemic school closures caused deep divisions in liberal parts of the country. But the political salience of the debate faded when schools reopened. For big cities like Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles, one of the most pressing issues now is maintaining services as student populations decline in size, since schools are funded on a per-pupil basis. Families have left big city school systems over the past decade for a variety of reasons, including high housing costs, frustrations with virtual learning during the pandemic, and the draw of charter and private schools. Enrollment numbers have ticked up in Chicago and other cities over the past 2 years, but remain well below pre-pandemic levels. But in the view of Mr. Johnson and his close ally, the Chicago Teachers Union president, Stacey Davis Gates, another former social studies teacher, fewer students should not mean fewer schools. They point to research suggesting that when Mr. Emanuel closes 50 schools in 2013, the financial benefits were modest, while students who had attended the shutter schools seemed to suffer academic setbacks in subsequent years. Mr. Johnson and Ms. Davis Gates are instead suggesting pooling more money into schools that few families currently attend. An example is Frederick Douglass Academy High School on the city's west side, which served more than 500 students in 2007 and now has only 34 enrolled. Mr. Johnson and Ms. Davis speak in sweeping historical terms, casting their agenda as a form of reconstruction for Black and Latino students. The goal of Chicago public schools in its inception, was to do two things: to maintain segregation and to offer the working class an entry into stockyards and factories, said Miss Davis Gates. What's needed in 2024, she argued, is a wholesale rethinking of the system's purpose, which she defined as providing every Chicago student with a high-quality school they can walk to, rich with bilingual programs, extracurricular activities, and the arts. The mayor, she said, is rightfully impatient and intolerant about the waiting longer. The two of them are personal friends, Miss David Gates noted. She said she and the mayor have both said their commitment to preserving every neighborhood school was informed by the compromises they have made in their own lives as Black parents living in historically Black neighborhoods with struggling institutions. Mr. Johnston's oldest son travels to a magnet school in a different neighborhood, attracted there by its orchestra and advanced placement classes. Miss Davis Gates said one of her 3 children had enrolled in private school because it had stronger athletics. Mr. Martinez, the school's chief executive, also said his children enrolled in the district. He said he agreed with the goal of creating new programs to draw students back to under-enrolled schools, in order that Black students travel farthest across the city to find a school they prefer. The core of his disagreement with the mayor, Mr. Martinez said in the interview, is that while the mayor has no funding stream should be left off the table, Mr. Martinez believes taking out a loan would replicate past mistakes and leave the district saddled with debt. Instead, he would like the city to tap property tax surpluses and lobby for greater state and federal investment. Andrew Broy, president of the Illinois Network of Charter Schools, said that instead of flooding low-performing, under-enrolled schools with more money, Chicago school leaders should support policies that allow more parents to make the choices they have made, picking high-quality schools that work for their families. He argued that students were losing out because 2 parties that typically sit across the negotiating table, the mayor and the teachers' union president, were so closely allied. When you have 2 people on the same side of the table, the only ones not represented are the students and taxpayers, he said. When they're not at the table, they end up being on the menu. In the 1990s and early 2000s, Chicago and several other cities transitioned away from elected school boards to mayoral control of schools, part of a national movement meant to streamline accountability for public education. But academic and political results were mixed. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, a Democrat, signed a bill in 2021 transitioning school back to an elected board. Now, with the first vote to seat new board members approaching Election Day, the union and its critics in the charter school world are pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars into direct mail. Union allies have accused their Democratic critics of embracing a Trump-like agenda. Charter school supporters are pushing back against Mr. Johnson's promise to prioritize traditional neighborhood schools over charters, magnet schools, and elective enrollment options. The union had long seen the elected board as a way to influence the system government, but shifting to elections also means its opponent could gain seats. Even some left-leaning members of the Chicago City Council have become skeptical of the mayor's budget strategy, worrying about piling up new debt when the district cannot afford its existing pension commitments. Andre Velasquez, a city council member, noted that he, like the mayor, had come into elected office with a background in progressive activism, but the 2 roles, he argued, were fundamentally different. A lot of us are used to holding up picket signs, he said. Now you have to deliver the results. You start realizing it's a lot more nuanced. And that is all we have for today. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.